Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just bear with me. I'm getting set up. Let me see. Okay, I should be on. Hey, Kimber, let me. I'm not sure if my headphones are working, so please let me know if you can hear me. Um, Tonight should be relatively interesting, I think, for several reasons. Why? There we go. There we go. I can hear myself. Excellent. Okay, everybody, I'll be with you in a second. Just let me post the links to Facebook. Okay, that's up. One more and we're ready to go. Okay, excellent. We're ready to go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a very special episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia, possibly my very last. Woo! So tonight was inspired by a particularly entertaining series of events that I've had happen recently. Particularly the fact I seem to have annoyed, he would probably consider himself a demon or at least a half demon because he claims he's not human. And witch, because of course we're going to get into that as well. On the website Quora, because he claimed that there was an actual witch cult in the not. And when I say witch cult, I don't mean Wiccans. I mean witch cults in the sense of they, we're in league with Satan, practicing black magic and in league with Satan and all that absurd nonsense in Salem, Massachusetts during the witch trials of 1692. I told him this was bluntly ridiculous, asked him for any evidence whatsoever, and he said, I can prove it to you, I'm a witch, and proceeded to tell me how he liked to reach out and touch people's hearts with magic and squeeze them. And obviously, if I didn't believe him, he would prove that he was right by doing. So, for one thing, I've been doing this long enough to know more than a little bit about black magic and this kind of thing. And certainly long enough to notice an edgelord when I saw one. And I'm like, okay, I'm not afraid of you. Get over yourself. This isn't going to happen. You're still wrong. And even if you could, and as I tried to illustrate to him, even if he could do this, and he can't, because he said he would do that on Tuesday or Wednesday, and I didn't die. And he told me the next day, oh, well, I didn't do it yet. Or he told me later that day he hadn't done it yet, but wait for that night, he was going to do it then. And I didn't die. They go, I give you a second chance. But you're pushing me. Don't do it. Stop. It's like, and I didn't die. And he's like, oh, we because he has this egotistical referring to himself in the third person shtick. And he informs me that they had been waiting to see if I responded, and since I apparently had, although I hadn't done anything, they decided that I was going to die tonight, specifically on Sunday or Saturday. So I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I do a live stream on Saturday nights. Here's the website. Why don't you do it then so everybody can see? And on yesterday, he claimed that he had reached out and touched my heart, that I had felt it, and I knew the truth, and I hope I liked his love letter to me. This is utter nonsense. I haven't felt anything. I don't expect to feel anything. The kid's an edgelord. But the whole thing amused me to no end, so I had to do my farewell performance, as it were, which is why this episode is called Will I Live? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this guy actually is a black magician and in league with Satan and all of that other terrifying stuff, and I'll die before the end of the episode. If so, why will my face be red when I get to heaven? More likely, though, I'm pretty sure that I'll be here next week as well, and the week after. Now, don't misunderstand me, and this is an important point in my opinion. It's not that I don't believe in black magic. I'm well aware of the fact that it exists. I've been a demonologist for the last 20 years. You can't do that without realizing that curses are a thing. But the other thing you have to understand is a lot of people that claim that they have magical powers, and I've been running into this a lot lately, are lying to you. They have a couple of weird coincidences go their way once in a while, and they think this is proof of their magic powers. Or they're off their freaking rocker. In fact, a lot of people who, and I say this with all love and respect to my friends who do practice, because my friend Arthur Moyer, who's been on the channel before and took part in Wrath of Khan, is a magician. Not everything he does would be qualified, but he's not a devil worshiper by any definition of the word. He's not everything he does would be qualified as white magic. And I do not mean to claim that Arthur doesn't know what he's doing. I do not mean to claim that Arthur is nuts. But in my experience, a lot of people who actually are involved in magic, particularly people who are involved in black magic, are a little off their rocker. And this really should make sense when you think about it, because it's a dumb thing to do, to engage in devil worship. So what is devil? Why do I keep saying devil worship instead of Satanism? Excuse me. First, I want to be clear. When I say devil worship, I mean the worship of Satan or some other being that the person knowingly associates with evil, or that for all intents and purposes might be evil. It is evil. Not all devil worshippers call the devil Satan. Some call him Lucifer, some call him by all the various other names for demons and devils throughout the course of human history. Some call him Set. There's a huge range of different names they stick on it. And here's the other place that this gets weird, because there's also Luciferians. Luciferians are people who openly worship Lucifer. Some of them are not devil worshippers. Or at least they do not see themselves as devil worshippers. even though they openly associate themselves with Lucifer. Why don't they see themselves as devil worshippers specifically? That's where this gets interesting. We know, and this is not a great secret, that Christianity and Judaism before it demonized a number of beings that pagan cultures worshipped as gods. This is very common. You saw pagan cultures do it to each other long before Judaism, let alone Christianity, hit the scene. But Christianity gets a lot of, and like I said, so Judaism gets a big reputation for this. A perfect example of this is a very old Canaanite deity that was known as Baal. Baal eventually became Baal-zebub, which became Beelzebub, which means the Lord of the... Baal means Lord, Baal-zebub means Lord of the Flies. So it's, again, hardly anything new. Luciferians believe that Lucifer is an example of this, because the name Lucifer in Latin means light bringer. It's also an old Latin name for the morning star. This is why, for example, if you watch the TV series Lucifer, he calls himself Lucifer Morning Star. And you'll see that in other depictions of Lucifer throughout history. My new friend and guest from last week, John Hartness, calls him Lucifer Morning Star in some of his books. Based on the same thing, and there's the same logic to it. And it is a valid logic. And the thing of it is that there are two verses in the Bible that people usually think of as referring to Lucifer. One of which refers to the king of Babylon, the other one of which refers to the king of Tyre. Christians have argued, and I tend to agree with them, that in context, if you read the verses, they're clearly referring to more than a human king, because they talk about this being having been in Eden, having a covering of precious gemstones. So it's been interpreted that they were speaking to the power behind the throne of the king, the demonic force that was ruling those lands, which is, of course, why Lucifer gets associated with Satan, or sometimes seen as a separate demon. Luciferians believe, no, it was an actual old pagan deity Christians demonized for their own purposes. It's a weird interpretation. I don't agree with it, but it is what it is. But more broadly, there is actual worship of demons and devils. This has gone on throughout history, certainly, by various names. And the thing to realize is this, well, it sounds like, to some extent, is a heresy based on Judaism and Christianity. It's not unique to either religion. There's always been this perception that people in society that summoned evil spirits, that conducted black magic, that did all these other things. Sorry, I have not slept today. I'm having a bout of it. For me, it is not the heart problem. It is not a manifestation of any heart problems. But people have openly consorted with forces they saw as dark since at least ancient Babylon, most likely long before. The thing to realize about this is this. I say they've done it since at least ancient Babylon, which is true. I do not mean to say that Babylonians worship the devil. Just that we have records of people knowingly practicing destructive magic and consorting with dark forces going back that far. And that partly also has to do with the evolution of how we've seen these entities. In Babylon, a lot of what we would now consider demons, most notably, of course, Pazuzu from the movie The Exorcist series, was a god. In fact, Pazuzu is actually a protector of children if you read Babylonian mythology. This Car Friend Simulator, this is not a political channel. We're not getting into that. Please leave those comments off my stream. you have been warned. But that's the situation you're running into. And there's an interesting question that could certainly be asked that's a bit of a chicken in the egg. Particularly because what you'll run into is one time we know pretty concretely that people were getting into the worship of the devil is during the medieval witch trials. To be clear, the majority of people during the witch trials who were accused of witchcraft were innocent of any such charges. Everyone in Salem was definitely innocent of any such charges. Even Tabuta, who famously was supposedly practicing a form of voodoo, there's little to no evidence that she ever did anything of the sort. It's basically just an old urban legend, that a pretty old one, but there's no hard evidence. Even the story about looking into the egg, it's not necessarily part of voodoo magic. It's not. It has some things in common, though, with some European practices that aren't even necessarily witchcraft. Just there are a whole bunch of superstitions that were popular at one time, like cutting a piece of an apple, throwing it into water, and then the shape the apple would form would be the letter the man and woman was supposed to marry, and various other strange concepts like that certainly went on. But again, coming back to point, because of course I like to ramble, we do have decent evidence that at various points in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, people did actually take up the worship of demons. The question becomes, did they take up the worship of demons and that's what inspired the witch hunts? Or did they hear about the witch hunts and get the idea to take up the practice of demon worship? I'm slightly inclined towards the second interpretation, to be completely honest with you. Because humans have been humans throughout our history. And if you suggest to people this rebellious idea that's edgy and dark and supposed to give them power, somebody's inevitably going to try it. But it's impossible to know for sure. And throughout history, I think a lot of the times, it's like you tell someone there's this dark and malevolent deity out there that you can't talk to because it causes disease and illness. And somebody's eventually going to pray to it just to see what happens. And again, even a lot of them, like Pazuzu, he's a protector of children. He's also a god of disease. Ironically enough, and a causer of disease. Ironically enough, the reason that people traditionally prayed to Pazuzu was to protect their children from Lamashtu. Lamashtu was Pazuzu's wife, who was a murderer of children. But people also from time to time to pray to Lamashtu. Because there was this idea that the spirits had both, or deities had both positive and negative qualities. Most of the surviving grimoires you find from Babylon, by the way, are less about how to summon demons or pay homage to demons, and more about how to banish them. About it, if a person is being possessed by some specific demon, how to cast it out. Particularly, again, because they were the idea throughout history has generally been that the disease, natural disaster were the work of demons. So you had to cast them out. It logically follows if somebody wanted to make someone sick, and you work with demons. You also see this in a lot of ancient cultures. There is this concept that you have, and this is going to probably offend at least some Wiccan viewers, and if it does, I apologize. That's that's an excellent question, girlfriend, and I'll circle back to it in a second. But a lot of early cultures, there's this idea of what our anthropologists would traditionally call a witch doctor or shaman. A witch doctor or shaman is a priest. It's a holy person. Is bridge between the human world and the spirit world that communicates with spirits on the behalf of the tribe, does magical workings to help with the hunt, to help with agriculture and things of that nature. And then what anthropologists, for good or ill, in the opinion of Wiccans aside, call witches, which are people that deliberately worked outside of the tribal structure, use magic for their own sakes. Which is, again, getting into this idea of black magic and devil worship. So Car Friend Simulator has asked, and I wanted to hit this real quick because I love the question. So what is my plan if I live? Did I make any kind of arrangements at all? Well, if I do happen to survive till tomorrow, I have some friends coming over because Sunday's our weekly day to get together and play role-playing games. And then Sunday night, I'll be going to work and pretty much carrying on with my life exactly the way I always have. It is a terrifying thought, though. I mean, what if I don't die tonight? I mean, I have bills to pay and responsibilities and things like that. Rob R. asks, have I ever listened to the Worried Waltz on WPRB? And no, I've never even heard of the Worried Waltz. Of course, this makes me think of just because of the topic makes me think of the urban legend about a song called Gloomy Sunday, which supposedly drives people to suicide, although in reality there isn't. Oh, it's a show, not a song. Carfriend Simulator comments, dying is almost better, lol. Wake up. Dang, I have to go to work. Yeah, I know. Work is terrifying. Actually, I jest. I actually quite like my job. The moment I'm working an overnight shift as a security guard at a trucking place, mostly I get to sit around and watch YouTube all night. Or Netflix, or both. But I will check that out. Apparently, it is a radio show called Worried Waltz. I haven't heard of it before. But I will check that out. Thank you, Raw R. Okay. Raw comments, I recorded a mix one time and added factory sounds, and the next day a guy died in a car accident outside of their work. That's unfortunate, but that sounds like a coincidence to me, to be completely honest with you. I don't know the statistics. I can look them up real quick. So there are 6 million car accidents in the United States every year. There's 36,560 fatal car accidents in 2018. We have a tendency as humans to look for patterns. Particularly, we have what's called confirmation bias. That when we look for something, we tend to find it. So you play the song and there's a car accident, and you remember that. I'd ask how long have you worked there, and has there ever been another car accident in that area? And I'm betting that there's been one nearby more often than that, if not even right in front. Then the DGA Silky Silhouette, he used to do this crazy chanting, see faces and things. That's interesting. I'd have to look into it more. There's also what's called pareidolia, which is a human tendency to find patterns in clouds and mist and fog and things like that. This is why you can look up at the sky, look at the clouds, and that one's a bunny, that one's dragon, that one's a Death Star. Because our brains are designed by I hate to say design, but our brains are basically function as pattern-seeking machines because of evolution, and because in the wild, a pattern often indicates a predator is hunting you, and it can save your life. The problem is that often we still have this feature, and it doesn't really serve any purpose. This is also, of course, why people see the face of Jesus in whatchamacallit, tortillas and things and toast. And no, I haven't heard of John Cage either. I'm not familiar enough with him to comment on that. And yes, toast is another fine example. I believe, for that matter, that you can now buy a toaster that will toast Jesus onto your slices of bread, so you don't need to wait for pareidolia to find Jesus on things. You can just toast him right onto your sandwiches. I'm not quite sacrilegious to do that, but I have to admit I've been tempted once or twice to buy it for the sheer lulz factor. There's another one that will turn your toast into the Cylons from Babylon 5. I'm not particularly not Babylon 5, Battlestar Galactica. I'm not particularly a Battlestar Galactica fan, but I've been tempted to get that just for the humor factor. But to get back on point, so you have this running tradition throughout history of the reality of that. I do not personally think, there are many Christians, of course, who would disagree with me, that magic is inherently evil. I don't think it's inherently good either. I think magic is a thing. Gravity is not evil. Gravity is not good. But if you trip and fall off of the Empire State Building somehow, though there's guardrails to prevent that, but hypothetically, if you fell off the Empire State Building by mistake somehow, gravity is not your friend. On the other hand, gravity is what keeps us all from flying off into space and make sure the planet has an atmosphere. So, good, evil, all depends on what's happening. It tends to see magic the same way. You can certainly go to malevolent sources to get power. You can do malevolent things for power. Sacrificing humans, for example, has been an ancient tradition in magic that has a dark reputation, and we'll circle back to that as well. But if you use magic in general, it's not necessarily inherently evil. For that matter, a lot of things that at one time were seen as magic are probably more like science. Let me give you a perfect example. If a modern day farmer goes out to a field and spreads around the newest fancy schmancy high-tech fertilizer, his plants will grow, yes? But if a shaman goes out to a field at midnight, does a ritual dance, offers up a chicken or some other sacrifice, slits its throat, and covers the fields in the blood of a sacrifice, probably needs to be bigger than a chicken, but will the plants grow? Yes, because blood itself is also a decent fertilizer. One is a ritual with magical significance. One is simple science. Same result. If you have a headache, you can take aspirin, or you can drink some willow bark tea, and you're going to get the same result. One, you may assign some special symbolism and importance to the second one, but it's still the same chemical compounds and the same biological results. What's funny here is that even in the Middle Ages, if you asked the Roman Catholic Church, they recognized that there was a fundamental difference between natural magic, which worked within the natural laws that God had laid out, and demonic magic, which worked with demons. One was acceptable, but had to be closely monitored because it was easy to trip into this other. Usually, it was generally thought priests, nuns, other members of clergy were the only ones that could really practice natural magic, because they're the ones who are wise enough to do it without falling into the temptation for greater power. And the reality of that is it's utter manure, because plenty of priests, even at least one pope, if some of the stories are to be believed, wound up summoning demons. Case in point, there is a pope by the name of Honorarius. There is a grimoire that is, according to legend, written by Pope Honorarius. The story goes that he got bored with ordinary temptation, and he decided to start summoning up demons to challenge his piety and see if he was sufficiently holy to avoid the temptations that they could offer. That grimoire does exist to this day. In fact, this is the other reason we know that people have at various points in history engaged in the summoning of demons is grimoires for this purpose continue to exist. Most of the ones we know of date back to the late Middle Ages Renaissance period. A few may or may not be older. Probably the most prominent one that may be older is there is a book that is referred by a number of names, the Testament of Solomon, the Key of Solomon. But it's supposedly a book of magic written by King Solomon from the Bible himself on how to summon demons. Supposedly this was given to Solomon by God for aid in building of the temple. And then he wrote it down, as I understand it from my Jewish friends, he wrote it down so that it would be a record of this information he had been given. Not necessarily so that people would go around playing with this force they didn't understand. And then people since Solomon have gotten a hold of it and decided to try using it. What's interesting is the first known cohesive example is probably, I think, the 11th or 12th century. But there is a record as far back as the 1st century AD to some grimoire that had been written by Solomon. Interesting question, Ra, and that one I will allow. So Ra asks, not to be political, but do you think anyone in offices practices magic like this? Probably. I'm not going to name names because I honestly don't know who, if anyone, does. But my instinct is that somebody probably does. If you want to know where we do know that both the worship of demons and the practice of black magic is quite common in the U.S. government, the military. Not all of it is done. Here's the other thing I'll run into, is that we know that branches of the military have, both today and in the past, used magic, magical symbolism and ritual, and even in some cases claimed to have been vampires or devils or some other supernatural, or more accurately, preternatural creature in warfare. Is this because they actually believed that these things had power? Maybe, maybe not. Because the thing you'll run into is there's also this concept called psychological warfare. If you know your enemy, Carl friend, I'll come back to that in a second. I actually did a whole episode a couple of weeks back about the Nazis and the occult. But if you know your enemy believes in the power of magic, or believes in vampires or some kind of monster, and you can pretend that you're using that, you can use it against them. You can scare them. I'll give you an example of this in a second, but I want to address Car Friend's comment. So Car Friend commented, Hitler was obsessed with the occult. Actually, Car Friend, Hitler was not obsessed with the occult. Hitler had some really weird fringe science beliefs. For example, he believed in what was called world ice theory, which involves impacts with the Earth with various giant balls of ice that supposedly form the Earth and the solar system and a whole bunch of other nonsense. Certainly, he seemed to have an interest to some extent in dowsing, hypnotism, and other things like that. But Hitler himself was largely a materialist who didn't believe in the power of magic. He did certainly see the use of magic and occult ritual as a way of manipulating the public, because belief in the occult was very common in the early 20th century. But there's no evidence that he himself even believed in astrology, which is one of the things that was the most widespread among the high command of the Nazis. Heinrich Himmler, on the other hand, was absolutely obsessed with the occult. I don't want to dwell on this real long here. Like I said, if you go back through my video library, you can find a detailed video that my co-host, I don't know where he is tonight, by the way, Brian McKinley, did dissecting the various stories about Nazi involvement in the occult. The short version is, for the most part, no. You can also see either the excellent books Hitler's Monsters or Goodwin, the author of which I forget off the top of my head, and then Goodwin Clark's excellent book, The Occult Roots of Nazism, both of which get into it in good detail. Because there's some interesting stories to be had there, even though it gets hyped to hell and back more than it should be, perhaps. Which is unfortunate because of the fact there is an actual genuinely interesting story there, in my opinion, when you sift through the BS and get to the history. But yeah, I suspect at least some people in the government, and I don't mean to say it's one party or the other. I think both parties engage in it. And here's the other thing to realize is, another place you find a lot, and I mean a lot, of people that actually worship demons, organized religion. There are a bunch of devil worshippers in various churches, and I don't just, yes, in the Catholic Church, but other denominations as well. And there's more than a few. I don't want to get into, pointing figures at one denomination or the other, because believe me, it's true of all of them. It's not just the Catholics as much as they get demonized. But the reality is that they are out there. And some of them don't even think they're worshiping demons, but in my opinion, they are. I will name at least one name because I think this human being is despicable enough that he deserves to be called out. There is a man by the name of Steven Anderson, along with the man who is famous now on the internet for his sexual attraction to pumpkins, Tommy McMurtry, and other members of the New International Fundamentalist Baptist Church, who openly, unapologetically call for the U.S. government to round up and execute LGBTQ plus individuals. They want being gay, lesbian, transgender, bi, etc., punishable by death under federal law. They openly claim in their own propaganda, and don't take my word for it, go ahead and look it up. Look up Make America Straight Again conference, not concert, to hate those individuals. The Bible says in 1 John 3:15, one of my favorite verses, that whosoever hateth his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding within them. Kimber, I couldn't agree more. That is completely messed up. This is why I'm unapologetically calling them out. This is why they are among the few times I will break my personal rule of not bad-mouthing specific individuals or religious groups, because I don't normally want to do that. But I'm sorry, if you're calling for the mass extermination of people who have committed no crime, you deserve to be called out. And people like that, in my opinion, are worshiping the devil. Because here's a secret that exorcists and demonologists know, that a lot of Christians in particular don't. There are devils down in hell that call themselves Christ. Just because you say and just because you believe that you're worshiping a benevolent deity, be it Jesus, be it Buddha, Krishna, because is worshiping the light like a crusader a real thing? I don't know if anyone who openly worships the lights. Certainly, the light's often associated with God, and often a lot of descriptions of experiences of God describe him as great light. So I can see where that line gets a little fuzzy, but I'm not aware of any specific people worshiping the light. I will say, if you want, I will give you a simple piece of advice for how to tell if someone who says they're worshiping a benevolent deity, be it God, Jesus, Yahweh, Krishna, Buddha, or any other deity in the world, is actually worshiping a benevolent deity or whether they're worshiping the devil. Take a step back from what they say and look at what they do. Bible gives great advice on this to get Christian for a moment, because I am Christian after all, in saying that you will know a tree by its fruits. People who worship evil inevitably do evil things. If you want to know the morality of someone's beliefs, look at what they do with them. People who worship pagan deities, who go out and try to be better people and help people, are not, in my opinion, worshiping demons. People who claim to worship Jesus and call for the government to mass execute millions of innocent people are, in my opinion, worshiping demons. And yes, Vita Navitas, I want to say the early 2000s, the Vatican publicly opened that they were going to start teaching a course in exorcism at a big, very respected university in Italy. And a whole bunch, 250 priests joined up. If you're interested in the story of that, there is the book, The Rite, which goes into detail about a priest who did so. And then Killbot7 says that he met me at too many games a few times over the years. And thank you very much saying that you love my channel and asked me to keep up the right work. I do what I can. But so I've gotten a whole lot of the history of devil worship, but I've gotten into some of the theory of devil worship. So what do people who actually worship the devil do, I guess, is the question that people are wondering. There's generally two types. Well, there's more than that, but there's generally two broad categories in which you can divide people who worship demons. There are what you might call the amateurs and the professionals. When I say the amateurs, I mostly mean teenagers. If you want to know what teenagers do to worship the devil, hey, Lisa for Truth, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Watch heavy metal music videos. Watch cheesy B-grade horror movies. Because teenage devil worshippers get their idea of what devil worship is from heavy metal music, death metal music, and various horror movies. They're mostly kids, and it's mostly a form of rebellion. That said, they can be dangerous. There have been at least a few instances of kids who have killed other kids. Infamously, there's a pair of girls some years back who murdered classmate because they believed that the Slender Man urban legend figure had told them to do so, or it was in honor of him or something to that effect, which is beyond it disgusting. Beyond that, well, outright murder isn't super common, although it certainly does happen. It's not unusual to find teenage thugs who think that or consider themselves devil worshippers who torture and murder small animals, and things like that. And I should point out something as well. When I say that they get their ideas from heavy metal music, I don't mean to imply that metal music is satanic. There is certainly a Norwegian metal band, or there are a couple of Norwegian metal bands, I should say, that, the girls are, I'm sorry, Lisa for Truth corrected me and said that it was, they said it was Slender Man, but the girl survived. Thank God for the fact that she survived. I'm very happy to hear that. But they at least thought what they were doing was in honor of this dark preternatural figure. But there is Norwegian punk bands and metal and death metal bands that actually did engage, like verifiably engaged in the worship of demons, both privately and in concert. They were involved, particularly publicly involved in the number of burning a number of churches. Let me try and see if I can find the. Yeah, specifically the black metal scene in the 1990s. But again, here we go. Church arsons and attempts. But yeah, 1992, members of the Norwegian black metal scene began a wave of arson attacks on Christian churches. By 1996, there had been at least 50 attacks in Norway. In every case, it was resolved. Those who were responsible were black metal fans. Some of the buildings were hundreds of years old and had been important historical landmarks. So there are certainly people. There are exceptions. Yeah, mayhem. Thank you, Vida Navitas. Lord Ruin, that's a great question. I'll definitely circle back to that about Supernatural. But yeah, this band Mayhem did engage in these church burnings. These were really twisted individuals. The majority of metal performers in the United States, and I assume in general, I'm not an expert on metal, don't worship the devil. I do not mean to imply that they worship the devil. Even ones that we famously associated with Satanism, devil worship, like Ozzy Osbourne, Marilyn Manson. It's an act. More than a few of these people are actually devout Christians and regular church attendees. Or at least very, very nice down-to-earth people when you get down to it. It's an act. They understand it's an act. And having had friends, metal's not my personal taste. I'm not here to denigrate it or say it's evil. It's not my thing. Everybody's got their own taste in music. But I've had a number of friends who are into metal. And most metalheads are decent, normal people. They are not into this kind of nonsense. But there are kids at a certain age, usually just after puberty, that get into death metal, and they're angry. They're feeling kind of rebellious. Often enough, they're ostracized or unpopular at school, and they'll take up devil worship as a form of rebellion and think that they're following the great footsteps of these metal icons, who are in reality not actually devil worshippers. Kimber in Alaska comments that Rob Zombie is a great guy in real life. I've never had the opportunity to meet Rob Zombie, but from what I've heard, because my mentor Lou Gentili actually knew the guy, had him over for barbecues and things like that from time to time. But everything I've heard, he is actually a quite nice guy. And actually, a number of the other metal performers are nice guys. But most of these kids have no real clue what they're doing. They cobble together an idea of devil worship from various pop culture sources. But there are more serious groups out there. And it's hard to define a single way that they do what they do, because there are many different groups that approach it in many different ways. One of the more useful examples, and one of the more screwed up examples, is a man by the name of Adolfo de Jesus Constanza, who ran not actually traditional Satanism or devil worship, but a cult of what's known as Palo Mayumbe in northern Mexico, and Mexico City for that matter. They engaged in a series of ritualistic murders. In Matamoros, Mexico, at their ranch, I want to say 13 ritually murdered bodies were found before the cops stopped digging. What's interesting about this guy's case, Jesus' case, is that he would murder people. He would harvest their blood, their brain, heart, and other organs, put them in these black pots, and then communicate with spirits through these pots. They didn't generally. There's a lot of debate about whether or not he saw at least some of the spirits communicating as Satan, or if they were simply just the various Mesoamerican African deities that Polymiumbe is. For those of you who don't know, Polymiumbe is a religion very similar to voodoo in that it's a mix of African and other religious groups. Lisa for Truth asks, was he was into blood magic? Yeah. Blood has a very long history in magic and religious ritual as a way of communicating with gods or as an offering for the gods. In this case, yes, he believed the spirits would talk to him out of these cauldrons. And for years, he terrorized and had a high degree control of the Mexican drug trade. I mean, he had real power without invoking the occult at all. And people were terrified of him because they knew he would do this. And then eventually, when the federales caught up with him in Mexico City, before his apartment could be raided, he ordered that his followers shoot himself and his homosexual lover. And he swore that he would be back. It's generally believed that his followers continued to play an active role in the Mexican drug cartels. Although keep in mind, this all happened in 1989, so anyone who was involved in, apparently the name of it was the Narco-Satanists, or the Los Narco-Satanicos, is what the media called them. Also known as El Padrino, the Godfather. Along with, he wasn't just, Don Corleone. He didn't just have the Godfather. He had Sarah Aldrete, who was La Madrina, the Godmother. Again, these people actually killed people, both as a terror tactic to use against other people in the drug trade to keep them afraid of them, and it seems like an illegitimate belief that they could gain magical power from it and use that power to further their career and their goals. There are crimes of this sort that have happened. And when you get into people that actually pay homage, not the kids, not the people that watch a couple of horror movies and think they're now worshiping Satan. When you get into adults that do it, you find more, you sometimes find more organized groups like Narco-Satanicus. But it's worth noting there isn't this huge conspiracy of satanic groups. Most Satanists and more specifically, most devil worshippers, because I want to distinguish them from the Satanic Temple and LaVey's Church of Satan, which is a totally separate thing, are very paranoid and insular. They don't work with each other. This idea that you found in the 80s and 90s of this massive satanic cult that was working all over the world and hiding rituals, abuse, and things like that, it didn't happen. They've never been that organized, not historically, not today. You don't find an organized army of thousands of devil worshippers all over the world. You find some crazy people here and there. Some families certainly get into it, and it passes down from father to son or mother to children. In some of these instances, you certainly see abusive situations. There are also certainly situations of sexual abuse where the abuser did involve what seemed to be satanic elements. It's important to note here that most criminologists and sociologists and psychologists who've studied the phenomenon agree that what's actually going on is that abusers are using the trappings of devil worship to cover up their crimes rather than actively believing in it. Because the reality is, and this is one of the many reasons that these ritual abuse panic in the 80s and 90s really infuriates me, and I'm sure Lisa for Truth would agree with me, is that actual abusers were able to use the trappings of the panic to cover up their crimes. Because once it got out and people started to realize that the whole thing was a gigantic hoax, cops were less inclined to believe stories with those kinds of ritual elements when legitimate victims brought them to them. And child abusers are intelligent and do get organized. There is sadly groups on the dark web dedicated to sharing child pornography and sharing information on how to hide things from the police. And some of these people realize, if I dress it up in the trappings of the satanic ritual abuse panic, the cops are less likely to believe the victim. Did any of the people who did that actually worship the devil? Most experts don't think they did. I'm hesitant to give a definitive no, they didn't answer, but I think the majority of them didn't. And even if I think you run into a situation of, hey, that's kind of a cool idea, why don't we try that out? More than they did this, people found out about it. Basically the fact that it happened was a result of the panic, not the cause of the panic. The panic caused it instead of the other way around, if you can follow my logic. Just like with the witch trials, I think a lot of the people in the Middle Ages who got into devil worship didn't do it because they thought, oh, I'm going to worship the devil, that's fun. People have always had a kind of tendency towards rebellion and counterculture movements. I think devil worship in the Middle Ages was mostly the kind of the equivalent of being, and I don't want to say it this way because I have too many friends in the goth community, but it was kind of like being goth. It was a way of separating yourself out from the norm. Lisa for Truth brings up an excellent point. The Satanic Panic was an entire and total waste of time, and I would highly recommend, folks, if you're interested in the ritual abuse scare that I've touched on here, please go over to Lisa's for Truth's channel. She has an excellent video series on the subject. While she and I disagree insofar as I'm a Christian and she is considers herself an atheist, we are in complete agreement about the satanic ritual abuse scandal and Satanic Panic, and I have the utmost respect for the video she's made on the subject. In all the ones I've watched, I haven't watched them all. I need to get back around to that. But everyone I've ever watched, she's exactly on the money, and I agree with her entirely. So what I do want to address here is, like I said, there are certainly people involved in black magic and Satanism who do commit crimes. Or devil worship, not Satanism, excuse me. You find this in certain serial killers who show oh, good Lord. No, Judaism is not tied into Satanism. That's a myth going back to the Middle Ages. I'll get into that though, because that actually raises a good point. But let me continue the train of thought I'm on. But the thing that you'll run into is there are groups that committed violent crimes. There are, for example, also serial killers that have considered themselves dedicated to Satan one way or another. The two most famous examples of which are David Berkowitz, aka the Son of Sam, and Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, both of whom claimed at various points to have dedicated their murders to Satan. To circle back to the Judaism tied to Satanism point, it is not. There's a reason why people think that today, and it's actually pretty terrible. So, through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Judaism has been associated with Satanism and black magic, with devil worship and black magic. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that Christians, pretty much since Constantine, have been demonizing Judaism as the people who killed Christ. They aren't. The Romans are the ones who executed Christ. Because Jews, particularly in the Middle Ages, when Hasidic Judaism and Orthodox Judaism were the main sects that existed, tend to be somewhat insular. They were mistrusted. Their rituals similar to Christianity in some ways, since Jesus was himself Jewish. Yes, Lisa, specifically, it means accuser or slanderer. And it has to do with basically that Satan in Jewish theology is the prosecuting attorney of heaven, essentially. But, although it's worth noting, the name in Hebrew is Hasatan, which means thus, the accuser. So it's clearly referring to an individual angel, not just a general category. But the other problem that Jews had in the Middle Ages, aside from being slightly insular, in no small part because Christians didn't trust them because they thought they had killed Jesus. They had rituals similar to Christianity, but not quite the same. They believed half of the Christian Bible, the Old Testament, but not the New Testament. They wouldn't accept that Jesus was the no, that's a whole other thing. I would not Jesus in particular. It wouldn't be accurate to say that he referred to Satan as simply an accuser. He specifically, very clearly, in multiple verses,